All right. Well, so welcome to grade six. This is Eureka Math Squared or Eureka Squared Math, right? So, module two, lesson six. And what we're getting into here is dividing with fractions. And we're going to start with dividing a whole number by a fraction. Okay. So, we're going to start on page 83. So, I'm just going to cruise on down here. And there's page 83. And here's how we're doing this. Okay, so we're going to use what I like to call the measurement approach, right, to division. Okay, now what I mean by that is we're literally going to measure out the amount of groups that we need. So normally, if I had, let's say if I had 12 parts here, right, and I wanted to make groups of three, all right, my answer is four. What I'm asking is, how many groups of three can I lay out so that I have a total of 12, right? And that answer would be then 4. So if I have 12 total, right? So let's make a little tape diagram here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. All right. So there are my 12 groups, right? The question is, how many groups of 3, right? So how many groups, this is the measurement approach, okay, right, of 3 are in, right, measuring things out, are in 12, right? So measuring out groups of 3 so that I have a total of 12. Okay, well, here's a 1, 2, 3, right? So there's a group of 3. I'm just going to circle those. 1, 2, 3. There's another group of 3, right? Making groups of 3. No, notice I'm literally measuring things out. 1, 2, 3, right? There's a group of 3. 1, 2, 3. There's a group of 3. Now, where's my answer 4 come from? Well, how many groups are there? Right, so there's a group, there's a group, there's a group, and there's a group. And if I add them up, 1, 2, 3, 4. There they are. 4 total groups. All right. So you might have to bear with me here a little bit. I have a bit of a cough, so sometimes I'm going to pause the video just so I can have a little bit of a coughing spell, and then resume the recording. Okay. So let's apply what we just did over here. So now we're not dividing a whole number or making whole groups. We're actually making partial groups, partial values, but we're making groups none the same, all the same. So watch what happens here. So over here we had how many groups of 3 are in 12. Now we have how many groups of 3/4, right? So watch this. So I love just writing out my little statement of what's going on here. So how many groups, right, of 3/4 are in 3? Oops, I've got the N, right, are in 3, right? Question mark, end quote. So just like I started with 12 over here, I'm actually just going to start with my 3, right, as my measuring approach, right, my measurement approach. So if I just split these guys like this, there I have 1 group, 2 groups, 3. So there's my 3. And now I need groups of 3/4. Okay, so groups of 3/4. So if I'm going to measure out quarters, right, then I need to make sure that these whole numbers, right, these whole parts here are split into quarters. So I'm going to then split them into quarters. So if I draw 3 lines in each box, then I now have quarters, right? So this is a quarter, and this is a quarter, and this is a quarter, and this is a quarter, right? And they're all quarters. Okay. Now what I'm doing is measuring out or asking how many groups of 3/4 are in the 3. So if everything is a quarter, I'm just going to say 1, 2, 3. All right, there's 3/4. There's a group of 3/4, right? And 1, 2, 3. There's a group of 3/4 there, right? So there's one group, two groups, 1, 2, 3. Okay. And finally, 1, 2, 3. All right, so those are all groups of 3/4. So how many do I have? There's a full group, there's a full group, there's a full group, and there's a full group. So if I add them up, okay, I get a total of 4. Therefore, right, how many groups of 3/4 in 3? Well, there are 4 full groups, or 3 divided by 3/4 gives me 4. All right, and that's how that works. Now, the next part of that is kind of doing this without the diagram a little bit, but you'll have to do a little bit of thinking. So they want us to, right, evaluate this using the tape diagram. Now watch what happens here. So I'm going to play with this a little bit. I'm going to do a little part A, right? So if I took that 3 and now I'm making groups of 3/4, right? How many groups of 3/4 are in 3? What if I asked you how many groups of 1/4 are in 3? And I do that first. Well, wouldn't that be the 12? right? Wouldn't that answer be 12? What I mean is we had 3 whole, right? We had 3 whole, right? And I split them into fourths. Well, if I split them into fourths, right? That means I have 12 total groups, right? 3 times 4 gives me 12, right? Every one of these whole values, right, was split into 4 parts. And we have 3 such parts, right? So, I mean, 3 whole, right, split into 4 parts. So 3 times 4 gives me 12. Okay, so I'm hoping that part makes sense. Okay, so I wound up with 12, right? 12 uh, 1/4s, right? 12 groups of 1/4. So the question is, how many 1/4 groups are actually in 3? Well, then it's 3 times 4 gives me 12, right? Take 3 whole, split them into 4 parts each. 3 times 4 gives me 12. Okay. All right. Now, if I ask then, okay, well then, how many 3/4 groups, right? Well, then I'm asking you, I'm saying to myself, hey, wait a minute. If I'm how many if there are 12 1/4s and I triple the size of the groups, right? So I was saying if there are 12 1/4s and 3, and now I'm tripling the size of the quarters, I'm saying 3/4, and it's 3 times the size. Well, if it's 3 times the size, wouldn't I have then take the 12 and divide it by then 3 because it's triple the size. So if I'm looking for quarter groups and there are 12 of them, and then I'm looking for 3/4 groups, it's 3 times the size. I would then have 1/3 fewer of the groups, right? So I just take the 12, I divide it by 3, I wind up with 4, and there's my answer. Okay, so let's do that again. I don't know if I if I explained that all that well, or perhaps I explained it well, but you're still just not getting it. So let's do another one here. Let's take this guy. All right, so if I take 5, and I'm going to start with my statement, right? So how many? It's a little confusing, but once you get the hang of it, and the diagram helps a lot, right? So how many groups of 2/3, right, are in 5? Okay, so I'm going to start with the 5, right? So here's my little diagram, right? So 1, 2, 3, make 4 lines and you get 5 groups, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. They're my 5 groups. Question is, how many groups of 2/3 are actually in 5? So, da da da, right? Da da da, da da da, da da dee, and da da da. So now for later, part A, when I ask myself, okay, how many 1/3 groups there? So what did I just do? How many total groups of 1/3 did I just make, right? How many 1/3s are in 5? That's the same as saying, what is 5 times 3? So right there is my 15. Okay, so there's my 15. I need groups of 2/3 though, right, for my diagram. So if everything's a third, I need 2 for each, right? So 2, there's a 2 group of 2/3, there are 2/3, 2/3, 1/3, 2/3, right? 1/3, 2/3, 1/3, 2/3. Now watch what happens with this one, right? So I have one, another whole, whole group, a whole group, a whole group, and then watch what happened. I'm left with this guy. I'm left with only 1/3. But as a fraction, right? If I were to circle this, I have 1 out of a possible 2. I should have 2, but I only have 1, which means I have 1/2 of a group, right? I have 1/2 of what I really need. So if I add all of this, right, I wind up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5. There it is. So I can only make 7.5 groups of 2/3 out of a total of 5. Okay, so it's 7.5. So let's cruise down here, right? So instead of finding how many groups of 2/3 are in 5, I first find out how many groups of 1/3 are in 5. Well, that's 15. Okay, so now I can drop down and say, well, right? So if there are 15 1/3 groups in 5, well, then how many groups of 2/3 are in 5? Well, aren't I just going to take that 15 then and divide it by 2 because now the groups are twice the size? Well, if the groups are twice the size, I'm going to have half the amount. So 15 divided by 2, right, if I turn that into a fraction, right, is 7.1/2, right? So if you don't believe me, right, this is 15 divided by 2, right, that turns into a fraction. 15 divided by 2, right, that goes 7 times 14. Subtract to get 1. That is your divisor, right, and the 2 is your, um, I'm sorry, numerator, and your denominator. There you go. So 7.1/2. All right, so now if we cruise down a little bit, so minus the diagram, we can just start having some fun with this. So they set this up, right? So how many groups of 3/5 are in 6, right? It's a pretty cool visual way of dealing with this. And they're going to start with, well, how many groups of 1/5, right? So how many groups of 1/5 are in 6? Well, then, if I'm taking 6 whole and I'm splitting them into fifths, I should have 30 then 1/5, right? So 30 parts. Okay. Well, then, if that's the case, now we can then say, all right, well, if I'm going to triple the size of the groups, right, then I am going to need to take how many I had and divide it by 3, right? So so there I was 1/5. Now they're 3/5. So it's triple the size, right? Triple the size. So then I'm going to take my 30 and divide it by 3, right? And I wind up with 10. And there's my answer. Okay. So how many groups of 3/5 are in 6? The answer is 10. Okay. And then you can get even faster with that. Okay. So here we have, well, I'm going to start with, right? Well, I don't know about equals, but I'm just going to do a little a, right? I'm going to say, hey, how many 1/3 are in 4? Right? Well, if I have 4 groups and I split them into thirds, I'm going to wind up with 12 of them. 12 times 3 gives me, excuse me, 4 times 3 gives me 12. Well, take that same thought. Well, I don't know why I'm turning that into a fraction. Take that 4 and divide it into 2/3, right? I just doubled the size of the group. If I double the size, right, that means I want half as many of them. Divide by 2 gives me 6, and there's my answer. Okay? And all right, might as well do another one, right? So part A. Okay, so I'm going to take 3. I'm going to find groups of 7, right? So how many groups of 7? So that's 3 times 7. That gives me 21 such groups if I were to measure that out. So then I'm going to go to the real problem. I'm going to make the groups 6 times the size. Well, if I make the group 6 times the size, oops, not 12, 21, right? Take 21 and divide it by 6, right? It turns into a fraction, right? That goes 3 times for 18, 19, 20, 21, right? So 3 left out of 6. Right? Or 3 and 1/2. There you go. All right. So I hope you enjoyed that. And yeah, so that was lesson 6. Hope you had fun. Take care. Bye bye.